So I'm going to quickly share some slides and do a bit of an introduction before we introduce you guys to the panel. So if my panelists can let me know that you can see my slides. Okay, yep, lovely, thank you. So we are No Code Lab, myself, Georgia Halston, and Sandra Moore that I have on the panel today as our chair. We're really, really thankful that everyone has been able to make it today. This is our first event in 2022, and we're super excited because we feel like we've sort of just kicked things off a little bit more during the last quarter of last year, and we've got so much exciting things coming up over the next year, but we'll get to that. We just wanted to talk a little bit about our community. We're very, very excited about the fact that there seems to be just this ongoing interest and engagement with what we're doing at No Code Lab. We have run 7 events, 395 registered attendees to those. So thank you so much for everyone for your attendance at our events. One of them was actually in real life, was our No Code Court, which up until now has absolutely been the jewel in our No Code crown. But 2,750 of you have followed us across our social media platforms. Thank you again so much for that following there. And the amount of engagement that we've had on our content and our posts has also been huge. We've got 44 members across the No Code Lab member site. So please visit our site and become a member. And then we're upwards of 1,500 in our community across our mailing list as well. Just to give you a bit of a reminder about our pillars, I think this is really important to remind everyone every time we do an event, because we're very, very steadfast to the reason that we built No Code Lab. Intrinsic to the No Code movement and everything that it stands for are these pillars, and that's what we hold dear at No Code Lab: bridging the skills gap, accelerating innovation, accessibility to data and digital, and D&I as well. Super, super important. And we've got some events coming up specifically around these things. The impact that we are looking to have on the tech ecosystem locally, nationally and internationally is ensuring that we are entrenching the idea of rapid ideation and innovation. We want to make sure that we're celebrating investment opportunities that the concept of no code brings. We want to make sure that we're creating accelerated solutions to community issues and taking inspiration and sharing stories from those who are already doing that. If you have a look at our Twitter feed, we do try and share as many stories where we see no code at the core of tech for good. And we want to work with local authorities and national policymakers in creating change in access to data and digital, and democratizing the digital economy. That's really, really specific to some of the events that we have coming up there this year as well. So without me banging on as much as possible about the triumph that we think is no code movement, I'll pass over to Sandra. She's going to introduce our amazing panel, and they're going to give us a little bit of insight about themselves before we jump into a bit of a Q&A session. Please use the chat function if you have any comments, questions, if you want to jump in with any of your own ideas or experiences. It's absolutely, you know, a free-for-all. We want to hear from everyone. We talk about democratization of data. It's a democratization of a conversation here as well. So hopefully everyone enjoys what we've got coming up in the next hour. I'll stop that sharing now, Sandra, and pass over to you, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much, Georgia. We are really delighted to have this panel with us today from all over the world, which is part of the joy of being able to do these things still remotely, as much as we miss seeing everyone face to face. So Esther joins us from Clarion Law as the head of IP. Adam, who will be also introducing himself shortly, is a founder of a no-code platform called Settler. He'll tell you a bit more about that. Taylor is a no-coder hybrid UI UX designer and runs Brandweld, and also an investor in a no-code project called Unlocked. Wow, what a CV you've got, Taylor. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? And Jesus, you've been developing no-code for over a year using a variety of tools, including things like the development of stitched-on.com, which I'm sure you'll be able to tell us about today. So really excited to hear that. So what I'm going to do is just give you a minute to tell us a little bit more about you than my introduction. So maybe if we start with you, Adam, and then we'll get into the conversation. So Adam, tell us a bit about you and your journey.
Thank you very much, both of you. So yeah, I'm Adam Driver, the founder of Settler. My background is I'm a chartered accountant. I'm currently FD of an edtech business, but I'm leaving that at the moment. So the idea of Settler came about, I suppose, at the start of the pandemic. There was a lot of people that were getting made redundant. They were getting, losing faith in employment. They were starting to set up by themselves. There's something like a 47% increase in new business formations at the start of the pandemic. And it got me thinking about the experiences I've had about, the dealing with credit control, cash flow management, and a lot of these new businesses wouldn't have that resource in the business to help them survive. And we've all heard the stats about how many startup businesses go out of business in the first 2 years because of cash flow. So the idea of Settler came about, and I'm not a technical person by any means. I have no idea. I didn't have any idea about software at the time. So I leaned on a friend, saying, is this possible? Yeah, could we do this? And we've got this idea of Settler, and we started to make it reality because of no code. We have outsourced the development to another agency, and we're hopefully going to launch an MVP within the next sort of week or two, we hope, and go from there. But yeah, without no code, it wouldn't be possible.
Thanks, Adam. And I think really early on your journey, but it'd be great to hear your perspective on some of the things that you're thinking about right now, about the decisions you're going to be making, and we'll get into that around sort of no code and the sort of scale up of that as you build out your business. Jesus, maybe a little bit further along that journey, tell us about Stitched On and your journey and sort of where you are in that kind of no code life cycle, builder life cycle. Jesus, I don't know if you can hear us. Did you hear me? We've got you. Ace, did you hear that question? If you didn't, shall I repeat it?
What was that again?
Sorry, so I'll ask you that question. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey, Jesus, just about sort of stitched on, sort of your experience of working with no code, where you are on that at the moment, where you're on that journey?
Absolutely. Well, my name is Jesus Vasquez. I am from Texas, United States. I have been working with no code for over a year. Currently, I'm working on my tool called Stitched On, which is a directory/social media site for no coders. The idea is to make life easy for no code developers that are getting started or that are already in their journey to find tutorials and being able to change ideas and find new use cases for the tools that they use or they're looking to use in the near future. I currently specialize in Bubble, and I'm learning a little bit about Airtable and trying to figure out how to use Sano for the database because it will provide me flexibility to scale my Bubble-based app in the near future. I'm also a software engineering student. So the idea is to start with no code and scale later on using code once I exhaust on the capacity for Bubble.
Thank you, Hayes. That's brilliant. So it sounds like you're doing a whole load of different things, so learning, building, and you've also got a sharing platform. Do feel free to put your social media site or any links into the chat if it's things that people can find out a bit more about. So do drop them in there, and we'll come back to you on thinking about that kind of scaling up from no code to code, because I think that's a really interesting conversation for later.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Taylor, you're involved in all sorts of different parts of the no code community. Tell us about you and where that takes you.
Thank you. So I'm all the way from Denver, Colorado here. Kind of started, I think, my journey very traditional at an agency as a UI UX designer. This was probably about 7 years ago. We were working mostly on WordPress. I got literally like a note passed to me that was like, hey, you got to try Webflow. And I found it. I was on kind of the early beta invite list, and it changed my life. I mean, I literally saw the future of what you call visual development today, and I was really, really excited to play around with it. So I quit my job, freelanced, kind of took the leap of faith, and have been kind of doing the Webflow and a little bit of Adalo these days too, Airtable, MemberStack, Zapier, and kind of growing that small freelance career into a small studio. So that's here in Denver. on the side, kind of recycled some of the income into I would say, not so much like an incubator, but more like an accelerator, where it's just really a connection with usually my buddies, to be honest, to help them build out their own no code projects. And so that's called unlockedx.com. And so, yeah, you can check that out.
Thanks, Taylor. Do drop that in the chat as well. Again, share these things with everybody so they can take a look whilst we're on the call. Thank you. And moving on to the subject today and to introduce Esther. And what I'll do is just to remind you of the subject of today's event. So one of the biggest barriers and concerns around no code, which is why this is this sort of IP myth busting event, is dispelling, or maybe not, the myth around IP ownership. And is this a real barrier to the adoption of no code or the use of no code in businesses as they grow new digital and new tech platforms? So I'm delighted to also invite Esther, who is here really to also give us that kind of lens around, well, where are we with sort of IP around technology, and for us to sort of have a conversation around that. So Esther, why don't you just introduce yourself today and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi, I head up the intellectual property team here at Clarion. I have more than 20 years experience of working in relation to IP. When I started in the last millennium, there was much less kind of software and IP going on, whereas now it seems like I'm dealing with software and IP pretty much every day. Not necessarily in relation to no code. I haven't seen too much of that coming through yet, although I'm sure that will be coming through soon. But certainly dealing with issues around software in terms of who owns it, what the value of it is, and that kind of thing, which we see often when a business is being sold or looking to have investment into it. So delighted to be here today.
Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate your introduction. So I'm going to start by just highlighting that there's been quite a big transaction. I think it was yesterday Georgia shared this with me. It's just like, wow, this is huge. So Wandlebots, I think it's Wandlebots or Windlebots, but Wandlebots raised $84 million to teach robots without code. It's a really big no-code investment. And we're seeing almost every week now that there is more and more investment going into platforms that are either no-code platforms that people can use to develop technology with, or actually built on no code. So I think my first question to everybody for this discussion really is, to what extent is valuation or value of an organization dependent upon IP, and where is no code's place in that life cycle of developing a product? And I wondered if Taylor, we could maybe come to you first, because I know that we had a sort of pre-conversation, didn't we, offline a little bit around this. I'd be really interested to know from your point of view what you're seeing in the community in the US, because they're probably a few years ahead of us right now, as to that kind of investment, or the investment community sort of waking up to IP and no code.
Thank you. And it's a big deal here. There's a lot of questions around it. What ultimately is your ownership after you've spent months crafting up either an idea or a new website, whether it's like a product dashboard or a mobile app? It's probably one of the top two questions I receive when we're going through kind of that onboarding experience. It is stemmed from a bit of the venture capital, I would say, ideas as well. And so, we've kind of spoken that here in the United States, a lot of decisions are made based on budgets, based on certain type of ideas. And it is true. So do you own the IP after you build it? That's my ultimate question. And I always say, if you're working in Photoshop and you create a beautiful photo, and I think, Georgia, you're the one that gave me this analogy. Do you own the photo after you manipulate it? Is that your IP? That's kind of how I direct that question. Obviously, I'm not a legal, I would go to Esther and say, hey, please help me out here. But yeah, it's a big issue that we get asked a lot.
Yeah, and I imagine this is about value, isn't it? So what is a business, what are technology companies getting valued on? Are they being valued on the IP, the code, or valued on the usage of that IP or the usage of that product and the number of users and the revenue that it's driving? And I think we're seeing quite a shift, aren't we, towards how businesses are valued. And I know IP ownership has been protected because that's been part of the value, but I wondered, Esther, just thinking about what Taylor's just said, you're not seeing it come through now, but how have businesses been valued based on IP? What part of that kind of consideration in due diligence has that been up to now? And do you think that could change? What are your thoughts on that at this point?
Yeah, I think the way it's almost not on the value of the IP, it's on the problems that the IP throws up as you go through the sale or the investment process. So actually, if you haven't got good records of who created your software for you, if that's how you've done it, or you haven't taken ownership of it, if that's what you really need for your business, then it's actually those issues that have the bigger play in investment or in sale, that kind of thing, rather than I think necessarily the question of do you own it or don't you. It's just, I think you need to have a clear record of what the position is with the IP. And so long as you've got that and you can get your investor comfortable with it, then that shouldn't be an issue. And certainly talking to our sort of corporate team who are dealing with software mergers and acquisitions all the time, their view is very much, they see very few deals where it's actually the ownership or not of the software that is really driving the bulk of the value. It's much more around, have you got continual user fees or that kind of thing coming in? Have you got continual revenue? And it's really that rather than the IP ownership that the businesses are valued on. So I think there is going to be an issue. I think investors will need to start getting comfortable with the idea of no code and what that actually means. And I suppose perhaps there'll be a learning curve in the UK that we're not necessarily on yet. But once investors and buyers do know what it means and understand the process that you go through using no code, then it shouldn't be an issue.
And it's interesting, we've got a question in the chat actually from Richard, which again is for you, Esther, whilst you're talking, but it might be worth just taking a look at that. But I'm wondering if, this isn't really any different to other areas, like when you're running your service on AWS, that's actually part of your product and offering that you are selling and therefore is valued, but you don't own the service. And I just wondered if, we're just sort of no code is similar to other things that we're having to use to build out a technology and a platform.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's based to the extent that if you have software written for you from scratch, which is very different to no code, then you can then have ownership of that code. And so we do see that, if you genuinely have ownership of something, there can be a value attributed to that. But I suppose as businesses move more and more towards no code and investors get used to that, then perhaps the relevance of that will switch. I mean, we haven't seen it yet. I think it remains to be seen how it plays out in the sort of investment or acquisition forums, but that's my feel, I think, for the moment.
Thanks, Esther. And I'm just wondering, thinking about Adam and Jesus, when you're starting to use tools to build, these business solutions that you intend to turn into, businesses that are monetized and ultimately have value. Are you thinking about or looking at those licensing terms? Where are you in that consideration? And is that something that, do you understand what you're looking for? So maybe if we start with you, Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was something that I considered in the past, whether or not I would be the owner of the IP or if I am building something that will be owned by Bobo. The way I look at it is really similar to what Esther was saying. Does a writer own what they write when they use Microsoft Word or Google Docs? And the answer is yes. We are the owner of what we build. At the end of the day, it's just a matter of whether or not we're able to build something fast and iterate if we need to. And once we scale, we can move on to potentially using code or looking for other options to scale. We are the owner of the data, which is, I would say, the most important asset when you build a business. And whether or not we own the code, to me, that's not much relevant because I could always redo it in a different platform or with code in the future if needed to be.
I think that's a brilliant point, Hayes. I think you made two really great points there. Is one is the data actually more valuable than the code, and I think in today's sort of when you look at businesses, I think there is an absolute argument. It's a really great point. But actually, you also said something that I think really feeds into Adam, which is, isn't this actually about getting there first, time to market, and actually is the no code enablement of getting there first to win those customers and actually drive that revenue that ultimately has the value and get the data, which ultimately has the value, is that more important? Adam, I was just wondering if you see that as, what's your reason for no code? Is it about speed?
It is. I think the value in agility. I think that you get first to market, as you say, you can react quickly to feedback. You don't have to invest hundreds of thousands of pounds into a platform that might not be fit for purpose. You know, if I put something out into the market that wasn't right, I could scrap it and start again. I wouldn't lose any sleep. My thoughts on this were, I was unsure about the IP, about the valuation, if this was going to be an issue. I suppose the test that I did was speaking to investors and mentioning, oh, we're building it on no code, just to see what the reaction was. And no one batted an eyelid, which was really interesting. And I initially, when we put the idea of no code to the table, we said, let's just do it to prove concept. And then if we need to do, we'll build the custom afterwards where we have full ownership of the code.
At what point do you think, what's your tipping point? Do you think, what are the indicators that you might need to go from no code to code? Have you thought about that?
Well, the more I learn about Bubble, the further away that point is. So as long as Bubble scales in a way that we scale, then I don't know. I'm not too sure. And if the investors' sort of appetite for no code, well, not appetite, but their recognition of no code increases as well, then there might not be a need for us to migrate.
So it almost goes away completely.
Potentially.
I'm just an open question for everybody, and feel free for this to be, you know, just jump in and you know, join the conversation and you know, come off your mics if you feel that you'd like to follow on from somebody's point. But
Richard,
you know, sorry, go on, Jesus. Yeah.
No, Richard made a good point in the chat. And one of the reasons why I chose Bubble was because in their terms and conditions, they state that they will go open source if they go bankrupt or if they shut down. And that's a big consideration when selecting a no-code tool, whether or not they're financially stable and they are not going to disappear overnight. Because theoretically, you can rebuild it in code, but that will take time. You want to make sure that you're building your site in a platform that is not going to go to shut down overnight. And one day you wake up and you realize that your site is down and you lost not only your site, but also your data. So that was a big consideration when selecting Bubble.
Yeah, so the size and scale of the no-code platform and its sustainability is that due diligence is probably more important than the licensing, it sounds like, from your point of view. Is it going to be here tomorrow? Yeah.
From my point of view, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Taylor, I can see you come off. Right.
Yeah, and one thing to add to is like what we're seeing here is this uptick, especially in the last 2 years, especially during COVID, of integrations and a hybrid of platforms being used. And ultimately, there's that magical export feature that really exports that front end design, you know, not talking too technical, but brings all of that code down into a nice little zip package that's generally around like Bootstrap 4 basic HTML. So I think what you're seeing is, again, kind of this emergence of a couple different, you know, assets at play. So sometimes we're doing like React apps inside of Webflow. There's like a hybrid of Zapier calling a different API from Xano, like, you know, Jesus has been kind of working in. And so I think that that's not stopping. And I think that's just making some of these, I would say, platforms even bigger, especially Zapier. I don't know if you've seen their valuation. It's a bit awesome.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do sort of wonder if we're not far off this just being the new norm for development, but it's moving that fast, it seems to me. I don't know if anybody's experienced, but 12 months ago when we set up this community, no one really knew what it was. Certainly in the UK, it felt like this completely, you know, new thing. Now I feel I'm meeting all the time more and more and more people that are just building in no-code tools and talking about it. So do you think the pace of this movement and change is actually just going to take this problem, this concern away, that actually this IP conversation is almost finished before it started? I just wondered what people's thoughts were that.
I thought, Sandra, this is conversations that I've had with Steve at TAP before, is that we've had sort of tech bubbles before, and people are, all of a sudden it was AI and machine learning, then all of a sudden it was augmented reality and virtual reality. And I think that what's happened with no code is it has been lumped in with one of those buzzwords, when actually it's been around the whole time. It's just got a new name. I was using if this then that to set the lights up in my house like 7 years ago. That was me no coding the lighting setup in my kitchen, but I didn't know that that's what it was, and I didn't know that that's what it was called. I've set up our websites on Squarespace for No Code Lab, and I just feel like because this whole no code thing has been named this, and people are trying to package it up, although again conversations that I've had with Steve and other people is that it still is not been defined specifically. That maybe the concern is not necessarily just about, is the platform going to be here tomorrow? The concern is this a flash in the pan? Is this a buzzword? Is this something that people has some sort of longevity in terms of, should I be investing in this, or should I be getting involved with a company that's built on a no-code platform? And the answer obviously is yes, you should definitely be getting involved, and you shouldn't be afraid of the fact that it's now got this new name and it's got all this hype, because it does have longevity. No code is here to stay, and I feel like maybe we're banging the drum to make sure that people are believing that and understanding that it has always kind of been around. Someone's talking here about a Dreamweaver. That was when I was at school, and I don't want to say how long ago that was, but it was a long time.
Access databases, right? We could list them. Your WordPress was mentioned by Taylor. That is no code building websites. So really, if we actually looked back at transactions and of technology developments inside corporates that have made it through purchasing, or investments that have made it through due diligence, I think if we went back and looked, we could probably point at bits of tech and go, well, that's no code, and that's no code, and that's no code. So is this new or isn't it new? I think it's a really good point, Georgia, because are we talking about something that is new and everyone's going to have to learn about, or are we re-educating people on, this has kind of always been around, it's just got a new name, so there's nothing to be afraid of? Is that what we're saying? Okay. I just wonder what anybody else thought of that. Esther, I'm interested in your sort of view, if you look at it from that point of view and that lens.
Yeah, I think to the extent that you can get that message across to investors, and as Adam said, he's spoken to investors and it's not raised red flags with them at all. So it'd be really interesting to see. I suppose it depends on the investor, doesn't it, or the acquirer. You might have a less sophisticated person dabbling in acquiring a tech business. Maybe they are less used to the idea. Maybe it's a more of an issue for them. But I think it's just going to be on a case-by-case basis rather than a big problem across the sort of acquirer or investor industry.
So if it doesn't matter to investors, who does it matter to? I'm just interested what people's thoughts are when we talk about IP. When does that matter?
I think it does matter. It does matter to investors. It's just making sure you've got your story right, I guess, and your records right. So I'm not saying there are no issues, and certainly I've seen deals come unstuck because the IP hasn't been sorted out. But I suppose that's not a no code issue. That's a software issue, just a software issue across the board, really. I suppose the only point I'd make with no code as opposed to having something written bespoke is you will never own the underlying code because it's not been written for you. It's lots and lots of different people can use it, and that's the only situation where I can see that might be an issue. If for some reason an investor wanted you to own the code, you're not going to be in that situation with no code. But as I think Adam has recognised, if you get to that point, you can always have the thing bespoke written for you if you really are at that point. So that to me is the obvious place where it might be of concern. But how regularly that would be a case where somebody is demanding that you own the thing rather than just having the necessary rights to use it, which is really all you need. That's the key thing, I think, making sure that the platform you use gives you the rights to do what you want to do with the thing that you've created. More so, that I think that's much more important than ownership.
The question I'd have on that is when it comes to exit, if you're going to get acquired by someone that wants to integrate you into their business that's all custom built on their side, would they almost be hesitant to take on a no-code platform that doesn't quite fit with what they do, even if the business is a perfect match? If the code behind it is not the same, if it's no code, would they be reluctant, do you think?
The way I talk about that for a while, right? But the way I look at that is, in reality, if you think about it, there are many code languages out there that you can use to build your app. They might not match to the acquirer's language, and they might have to rebuild it to make it fit. So to me, the what if, that's a rabbit hole that I didn't want it to go into, because there are many what ifs when it comes to coding an app.
Yeah.
It's super. It's a really, really important point as well. I mean, look at a really, really basic example of that was when Microsoft acquired LinkedIn, thinking that it was going to be this amazing thing and it was going to be awesome. And then they acquired it and then looked at the back end and saw that it was put together by spaghetti and chewing gum. And we're just like, oh my God, what have we done? This is no way going to fit into things that we've built before. But you know what? They've made it work and they had to. And no matter what you've built and what you've built it in, and this, like I say, it could have been made in Dreamweaver, that and then they'll have a look at it. It may not fit into an ecosystem that already exists. Steve is asked here in the chat, when you sell the IP, what is it the buyer owns? And I mean, anything to do with tech generally is quite ephemeral, but what is it? What is the intrinsic value of having the code? Nowhere near as important as the value of the brand and the data that obviously that we've talked about. Sorry, Sandra. That I just jumping on the.
It's perfect. Yeah, I think it's an interesting area, because if we're thinking of starting to create a new platform, Adam makes a great point. Is it about the raising of the investment, or is it about the exit? I mean, are we, like with most things, when we build a business and build a solution to a problem, whether it's inside a corporate or as a standalone company, what's the ultimate intended outcome or exit for that solution? If you're in a corporate, then we're not really thinking about an exit. Is it solving a problem, and is it going to get us there quicker? And can we get through our purchasing procurement process? Are they going to be happy that it meets the kind of appropriate rigor of basic procurement entry requirements, right? Which is a larger corporate for no code. That's probably a bigger barrier than it being anything to do with an exit. But the exit does matter, Adam, I think. And I suppose, Esther, I'm just thinking about pitfalls, really. So thinking about, yes, there's in due diligence, if you're raising investment, what are the terms? I just wonder if you've had maybe some tips around the things to look for, whether it's at that stage of going through due diligence or an exit. What are the things that people should be keeping an eye on? Back to Jesus's point on, are they big enough? Are they going to be around tomorrow as well?
Yeah, and I think the issues, whether it's on investment or whether it's on a sale at the end of the day, are the same, really. The buyer wants to know that the value that is in the business at the moment is not going to disappear when the sellers walk away. It's going to need to know that the buyer can continue to run the business, probably wants to know that they can scale the business as well. So it's making sure that you've got whatever platform you've used, you are able to, carry on doing the software, scale the software if that's what you need to do, add on bits to it again if that's what you want to do. So I think it's making sure you've got the right platform, and the platform that gives you the right rights to the software. So I was having a quick look at some of the platform T's and C's, because I'm a lawyer and that's what I like to do. But actually they're quite different. Some of them were saying, or one of them said, you can only use the thing that you create for your own internal purposes. Which is fine if it's inside of a corporate to sort out a corporate issue. But actually, if you're trying to build a business to then sell, that's not necessarily what you want. So I think the key thing is making sure you've got the right platform and just doing your due diligence on the platform to make sure it gives you what you need. And like Jesus had said, in terms of the certainty that using Bubble, with it going open source, if the business goes bust, then it's just thinking about those issues, really.
So I think those sorry, go on.
And I was going to kind of add to that too, is yeah, that there's something that she just mentioned, which was if you are, exporting that code or using it for external ideas, that process is a little bit different. That conversation is a little bit different too, ultimately, that I've seen with me sitting in between an investor and a product manager or a CEO. And there's a kind of a fine line that we generally see, which is if there's a core intrinsic value in the code that you're writing, that generally should then be prioritized. So resources should be thrown at that. Investors generally will say, hey, maybe we take this off of Webflow at this point, and you guys kind of, focus on that actual platform that maybe is doing something different than just connecting a community member with like a data point. At that point, then we start to have that conversation of how that gets exported and what happens. But there is, a lot of examples out there that Spring Health, Carbon Health, especially the past couple years, where big valued companies, those that are entering in the unicorn status, so over $1 billion, are using no code. They're using a hybrid of integrations. They're using the no code ecosystem for connecting a data point to another data point, whether that's an internal use case or an external use case. And they're getting valued on that in a higher level because they've been to market faster. And so I'd kind of go back to what's out there now. What kind of companies are on those platforms and have made it big, for example.
Yeah, and I think watching the market and seeing what the market is valuing makes a big difference, right, to our confidence in what we can and can't do with these tools, frankly, as far as how they drive value on and off the platform. Because I think what they do is they get us there faster. They help us to build out the MVPs. And also, I think a really important point, and Taylor, I think this comes down to when you've got scarce resources. You were talking there about if you've only got so many development resources to actually apply to a project, you need to make some decisions about what you can and can't do. That actually we do have a problem with the talent pipeline. And the biggest opportunity for no code is to broaden that, because it lowers the barriers to entry. And isn't that a bigger reason to approach projects with no code? Because actually we can deliver solutions without necessarily having to have this very narrow and limited talent pipeline that we currently got that are developers. I know, Jesus, you've really have some strong thoughts on this, but I think there's some big benefits outside of just getting there fast and not worrying too much about having to write the line of code. Do you want to talk to me about your thoughts on this? We'll have a general conversation about that benefit, really. Does it outweigh the IP ownership, I think is the point, really.
So let me see if I got your question right. I'm sorry, my internet, I guess, is going
No problem.
In and out. So I guess your question was some of the reasons why I decided to go with no code outside of the IP.
Yeah, so slightly different, just in the fact that no code helps to broaden the number of people that can participate in building no code solutions. It really levels the playing field. It really enables diversity, and it removes that bottleneck that we've got in that barrier. Yeah, that bottleneck and barrier helps everybody participate. I just wonder what your thoughts were on that being, that's a big benefit of being able to have more people involved in development, more diversity versus IP ownership. It was that piece, really.
I mean, to me, one of the biggest advantages of using no code is the fact that you can go to market fast. As Adam said before, you can iterate and figure out whether or not your idea will work or no. Find that product market fit, right? It requires less effort, and it gives you the opportunity. As of right now, no code, you can build basically anything that you can think of with the right skills and the right knowledge. So it allows you to get your idea to market before you have to make a big investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars in a coded in a bespoke app or site. To me, that's one of the biggest advantages of using no code.
And because you don't have to have the capital, you don't need hundreds of thousands, it means more people that perhaps don't have the access to that money or haven't had the opportunity to be supported in that way can build solutions, right? It really levels that playing field for everyone, doesn't it?
Right. And if you really think about it, anybody can get into no code. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a developer in this case to be able to get into no code. So that means that people that otherwise would not be able to afford to build an app for their ideas will be able to now bring those to market, which will bring innovation. It will bring economic changes to certain areas of the world that will otherwise not be able to get those economic opportunities, because now new companies can be built in months rather than years, and with hundreds of dollars rather than thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
I'm just wondering, for everybody else, is that the benefit? I mean, I look at it and think that this is just huge in how it enables a leveling of the playing field. Would Taylor, Adam, would you have gone to this if someone had said it's going to cost you a couple of £100,000 to get this app built?
I think I'd have still persisted to try, but I wouldn't have got to where I am now without it. I'd still be I'd still be chasing my tail, really, trying to find an investor that's saying, no, I want to see a product first. I think there's so many people out there that don't have the resources to put into it. There's, hundreds of thousands of pounds that have got some of the best ideas. So I think innovation should fly with it being the lower barriers to entry.
I think the barrier of entry is like the most exciting part for me. I went into this, especially when I found Webflow, and I was like, oh my gosh, we are going to build this whole front end visually so quickly and then export the code and turn it into WordPress. And like, that's what I did for 2 years. Like, I was selling that to people, which is kind of silly if you think about it, because, it's just like taking like visual development and putting it into development. But the transition in the learning curve into these, I would say, like, platforms is dramatically lower. That's kind of been proven, so that it is still visual development. So you're kind of, playing with HTML and CSS, and it's all magic coming together. And I think the more and more in our younger generations are going to tap into that. And I think it will be something just as accessible as like Canva, wherein they're playing with, like Photoshop, or creating a banner for their school play. And that democratization, I think, is a really cool part to see. We're obviously kind of all at the same, I think, like, age group. So I don't think we're necessarily seeing, younger, like 12, 10, 14-year-olds really use this. But I have a little bit, and it is really exciting. It is giving everybody a bit more of a platform to be creative, to be innovative, to get out there.
It's a really nice point, Sandra, and I think that maybe next time we'll have to have a panel of 10-year-olds and see what they think about no code, because I'm sure they'll be a hell of a lot more excited, maybe to give us a glimpse into the future of no code talent and the talent funnel that we are looking forward to really broadening out. I sorry to jump in, Sandra, but I just wanted Taylor to ask you a question about perceived value, because when it used to be, big corporates or enterprises or even public sectors would put out a huge tender for millions of pounds to build a brand new platform, and you go in and say, hey, I can build this in half the time. Do they then think, oh, well, you're just dragging and dropping stuff, I'm going to pay you so much less, and I'm intrinsically going to believe that there's less value in what you're doing, because you're not one of those magicians who's sitting writing all that stuff that we used to have to rely on, that was all this cloak and dagger stuff. You're doing something that maybe I could do. Does that come across like, actually, I'm going to put less value on the product or the service that you're providing?
And I honestly, seeing the chat too, there's a great point from a rocket scientist that he says, it's a great time to build apps on no code, but they still take a lot of time to build. So, you're still really kind of moving things together. And that brand value is something that I think we sometimes don't charge enough for. Whether it's you're a practitioner or whether you are just a technician or just love it, we sometimes get really involved in just the creation part that we don't really step back and realize, well, whoa, I just made a logo and a marketing site. And then also we went to launch in 2 weeks and they got 77,000, Twitter retweets. There's a lot of value in there. And so I would kind of go back to the community and continue to boost up your hourly rate because, you are still fighting for budgets that on a marketing level are still pretty large. I mean, I've seen them because we've had those conversations. And now, especially since Webflow is kind of competing with Bubble in terms of opening up to memberships and Logic, they're 2 tiers. We're now kind of competing with product development budgets and going, the bespoke and developer kind of seeing, okay, well, what is each going to cost? What are those timelines? Okay, well, going maybe on Webflow or Bubble, it definitely might get you there faster, but we might not see a huge, cost decrease. It still takes a lot of time to put everything together and to test that. And so, I would still maintain that level of across the board to the community. Raise your prices. You're worth it.
Thank you, Taylor. And I love the fact that we've got Steve telling me he's a rocket scientist on the chat, but still the builder of no-code platforms for people to build no code. So they don't have to be like Steve as a rocket scientist, which is absolutely awesome. I'm just kind of going through, and I thought I'd quickly summarize back, and then we'll sort of go to some final points of the session. So far, we've talked around, that it's more important to focus on how fast we do things and speed to market than perhaps worrying about how much of the code we create. And that's more important. And it's more important because the data that we create on our no-code platforms and the usage and the revenue or the problem that we solve for in a corporate is actually of bigger value than the lines of code itself. And that really is the balancing act of a decision. But that from a legal point of view, and Esther made points around, there is an element of making sure the usage license terms are fit for purpose for what you're using it for, making sure you're doing your due diligence around that there's risk assessments and things associated with internal kind of corporate, usage, and that I think Jesus made a brilliant point around, the stability of the platform and the longevity and doing some kind of DD. Is it going to be around tomorrow if I'm building on it? Which are all the great points. I think as I've kind of keep thinking about this, seems like to be a real balancing act. I'd just like to see if we could just talk about this. There's this kind of do things faster and not worry about the risk of IP to create value, to solve problems. But there is, as Taylor's just talked about, a kind of a value erosion as well, because we're doing things faster and simpler and we're not needing coding skills. So how do we ensure that we're creating enough value and in the projects that we're doing, the tools that we're using, that they are valued, whether they're internally by corporates because we've done it faster using no-code tools, or they are valued externally by investors or an exit because we've used no-code tools. I'm just wondering how we ensure that we protect that value, because at the end of the day, we're still solving the same problems. We're just doing it faster, right, and more effectively with more people. I know Steve put some comments, and it might be worth us picking up on some of those. But what do we need to be doing to make sure we maintain the values of the solutions to the problems that we are solving with no code? It's a big question.
So I suppose for me, it's just solving real life problems, and I couldn't really compare the two no code to code stuff. But as long as you're solving a tangible problem, then there's value in that, I'd say. And that should hold it. So I'm all about speed to market, get it out there, get it into the user's hands, and then solve the issue that you set out to challenge.
So it's actually more about the problem it solves than the technology or anything else.
In my mind,
is it actually solving the problem? Does the no code solution actually solve the problem that it set out to achieve? Does it do it quickly and effectively? Yeah.
And that's the thing with no code, you can do your surveys afterwards, you can do it quickly, you can get the feedback, and then you can make the amends quickly. So you are making sure that you solve that problem. So even if you don't do it first time, second time, third time, by the time you got to the fourth time round, for instance, you've solved that problem. And if you're to do it in a traditional method, you might not even got your MVP out by that point.
Doesn't this come on to the power of no code, because it's people that are at the front line that will know how these problems are best solved, that can be the creators and curators of the solutions to the problem? Does that not take us that ultimately to that point?
What?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I think there's too the intrinsic value of seeing what you're building as you're building it. That's also pretty big. So, we I think definitely emphasize speed today in terms of getting things out and published, getting eyes on it. But there's also kind of that facet where, and I think this might come from at least my perspective, because when I was like developing PHP, like WordPress, we would have like a screen, and then you would have a debugger, and you would kind of press your line, code, and then you would go ahead and hit refresh, where there's a little bit of a natural feeling now, where you can kind of see the production as you're actually producing it. And sometimes that's kind of scary too, especially if like clients are on like, a call and they're watching you create in Webflow, and they're like, oh, can you just make this button a little bit bigger? So sometimes it can kind of get you in a funnel, but I think that internal value of actually creating things as you're seeing them, you're seeing things in 4D rather than kind of the more 2D route. And I think that can also solve problems differently, whether that's better or worse. You just are kind of seeing that differently. That view is skewed a little bit.
So I think that's a brilliant point, Taylor. And there's a few people putting some great comments in the chat as well, which is, surely the real value here is that we are solving problems well with no code effectively by bringing the people on the front line on that journey with us, because they can participate and iterate in that process more effectively than developers in a room sort of doing something quietly for a long period of time and then publishing. There is an ability for more people on the front line that are dealing with the problems that technology can solve, engaging in that build. Am I making sense? I just think that is that the real value here?
It's like a living document now. And so we're seeing that a lot more than just this is what's published, boom, here's your website, or boom, here's your product. We're now kind of having that iterative process, additional authorship, etc.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
A slightly different point, but I think the point's been made about the value of the brand as well, as opposed to the value of owning the IP. So just with my IP protection hat on, I would remind people to check out the brands that they're planning to use to make sure they don't infringe somebody else. And, if you think the brand is really going to fly, then think about getting trademark protection for it. In the UK, it's only a few £100 to do that. So it's a very cheap way of buying yourself some really strong protection over a brand. So a little bit off point, but I think the value of the brand is clearly key. So it's worth thinking about it and protecting it.
Thanks, Esther. That's great. So there's lots of value by the sounds of it. There's value in getting there fast. There's value in being able to iterate with people that have the problem to make sure that solution really is the solution that solves that problem quickly, because it's more accessible as a technology. Value in the data. There's a lot to love, really. Is there anything else that are, benefits around this that sort of, maybe around value away from IP a bit that we've not talked about today, that's still kind of are wrapped up intrinsically in the value of what we create with no code?
The way I look at it, when was the last time that you visited a site or a platform and actually cared how they build it, other than whether or not that your data was going to be safe and whether or not it was going to do what they advertised to do? That's the way I look at it. customers don't really care about how you build it. They only care about whether or not you can solve their problems at the moment without being too hard to use.
Yeah. Yeah, great point.
Great wrap-up point there, I think, Sandra. And I'm going to have to cut everyone off because we've got a couple of minutes left, and I do have to tell you about what's coming up next. So thank you so much for everyone, all the comments, amazing. I wish that we could have gone through all that stuff, and I knew that this was going to happen, that we were just getting to the swing of it, and I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm always a bad guy on this. So let me just share real quick my final slide that I want to go over with everyone, and it's about what we have coming up for No Code Lab. Leveling the Playing Field is the next event that we have coming up on the 28th of February, and it's something that we've touched upon today. It's about how the no-code movement at its core is about leveling the playing field. It's about the democratization of data. It's about inviting anyone who's ever had a great idea into the technology ecosystem and stop shutting people out through the elitism of code. We're very, very passionate about this. It's core to one of our pillars, the diversity and inclusion. So there are some amazing examples out there of no code being used to just create a fairer world in general. So we're looking forward to sharing some of those stories with you and some examples of that. Finally, on the 31st of March, it's going to be the No Code Hack. So this is going to be an absolute feather in our cap from No Code Lab. It's going to be a whole day of hacking. It's going to be live. It's going to be in Leeds. So sorry for our American contingent that we've got on today. We wish that you could come. Please come to Leeds. We would absolutely love for you to come over if you've got the time. But yeah, it's going to be a day. We've got 5 teams already signed up. Absolute non-techies are going to come in and work with our technology partners to build something real time on the day, just 10 hours to go. And then we're going to have a networking event at the end where they're going to present the ideas and the solutions that they've come up with. We'll crown a winner. I'm sure all of them will be winners at the end of the day, but we'll do a bit of a ceremony there as well. And it's just like a great excuse to come out, do a bit of networking and really witness the power of no code in motion through an example of us doing it in literally a day with people who have never seen a line of code in their lives. We're talking mothers, we're talking frontline NHS staff, we're talking charity workers who don't even know, how to use their own WordPress site. That we're going to see them literally put together some solutions in front of our very eyes, and I literally can't wait for that. So unbelievably excited for that piece. I'll stop sharing, and all I've got time left to do in the last minute is say thank you so much to Sandra, powering through. She's a little bit under the weather today. Amazing chair as always. Thank you for Jesus for coming over from Texas and being a part of our event. Adam, literally can't wait to see what happens with Settler. It's big things are happening. Always support from Clarion. Esther, really appreciate all of your wisdom. And Taylor, thanks so much for all of your experience, your input, and sharing your journey with us as well. We really hope that all of you can remain part of the No Code crew going forwards. Hopefully we'll maybe have you speak on events again in the future. And thank you to all of our attendees. So many amazing comments, and everyone's been really engaged today. So that's what we really love to see. This will go live on the No Code Lab website. Please follow us across all of our social platforms, and you'll see the video sent to you on email as well. So that's all we've got time for today. Can't wait to see everyone again at our next No Code Lab session.